overdue, but one that is necessary in a manner to also curb crime perpetuated that limits authorities from booking these people. However, media fraternities in the country felt that it could jeopardize and subsequently endanger them and threaten media freedom in the country. We're now joined on the line by Frederico Links, who is the project coordinator, mainstreaming human rights in cybercrime law and policy making from the IPPR. Frederico, good evening and welcome to the Daily Roundup.
Good evening, Nina, and thanks for having me.
Let's start by briefly touching on the mandatory SIM card registration and data retention. Given that it's an act now going to be fully implemented, why was this decision constituted in the first place?
Well, I mean, this comes out of the Communications Act of 2009, out of Part 6. And since the law was passed in 2009, Part 6 has not been operationalized because the regulations weren't crafted. But over the last few years, the relevant government authorities have been working on these regulations, and now, earlier this year, in April this year, the regulations were gazetted. And you know, now Part 6 of the Communications Act has to be implemented, and these regulations come into effect on 1st of January 2023. So over the next so the groundwork is now being laid by CRAN and other government relevant government authorities for the full implementation of these regulations under Part 6 of the Communications Act.
Now, Frederico, we do know that, of course, media freedom and pluralism are at the heart of any democracy. And you'll be doing a presentation tomorrow on how the registration of these SIM cards and data retention could threaten media freedom in the country. Just briefly tell us more about this.
Yes, look, I mean, I'm not saying, and we're not saying that we're against sort of SIM card registration and data retention. The issue here is that, that the oversight mechanisms that mitigate surveillance abuse and abuse of these systems are not adequate in the regulations, are not adequate in the law, and this is where this leaves room for abuse of these systems to spy on journalists, to spy on civil society actors, to spy on opposition politicians and so on, as has happened in other parts of the world where these sorts of schemes, SIM card registration and data retention schemes, have been abused for that purpose. And there's a great body of literature out there on these abuses. And there is, sort of a move towards a recognition that this is problematic, that a lack of transparency and accountability and oversight, or weak transparency, accountability and oversight systems, when it comes to these systems that enable surveillance, state surveillance, enable abuse. And so this is the backdrop against which we are sort of having this discussion tomorrow. That these mitigating mechanisms, transparency, accountability, and oversight mechanisms, are lacking in our law and in our regulations, and this could become problematic in the future.
What is the overall objective that you hope to achieve with this presentation, and what it will bring forth in terms of safeguarding media freedom in Namibia?
Well, I mean, the aim is to spotlight the issue for journalists and media managers, to make it clear to them that we could face a situation where not just where anonymous sources, confidential sources of information under the scheme as it currently is will that will disappear. And investigative journalism, critical journalism will become threatened. because these systems, these regulations, put in place a system that is wholly invasive of communications of everybody, not just journalists. And this is a threat as well, of course, to lawyers. It's a threat to doctor-patient confidentiality. It's a threat to e-commerce. The online economy, where privacy of transactions and so forth is something that has to be guarded. But these the SIM card registration data retention regulations will eradicate anonymity. It will eradicate privacy, and that's a problem. So I mean, it becomes a constitutional issue in the process of implementation. So I mean, these are the sort of things that we'll be unpacking in tomorrow's webinar.
Frederico, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us here on the Daily Roundup, and all the best with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Nina. It's a pleasure.
That was Frederico Links from the IPPR speaking to us. We take a short break. When we come back, it's time for